Automated Weather Information Service, Jandakot Airport, time 0131 Zulu,
Time
wind 150 degrees, magnetic 3 knots,
305,
visibility
3 knots.
25 kilometers,
Yep.
present
So
weather,
hang
no
on.
significant
Can we
weather.
start this again? Can you remember the first time you listened to an ATIS or AWIS? It was probably absolutely mind-boggling and just too much information. But don't worry, it gets easier, especially when you know the format that the information is going to arrive in. And even if you're a seasoned pilot, there might be a few little gems coming your way. I'm going to discuss ATISs and AWISs and a few other things coming right up. So strap in and let's get into it.
Good morning, 3614, 95 Mallow, 7 PAB with altitude.
Coordinating, Halen, I'm running bank, talent, bank pressure rolling to 30 degrees. That's 30 degrees there. Stand by star 9000, 1013, KFI 25.
G'day everyone and welcome to episode 175 of the Flight Training Australia podcast, the podcast all about flight training and flying in Australia and beyond. I'm your host, Trent Robinson. G'day and thank you for joining me. Operation Talisman Sabre is well underway. Plenty of action up here in the top end. Not as big a impact and event as things like Pitch Black and Diamond Storm, but there's a lot of heavy metal up here, a lot of tankers, fighter jets located in Darwin and other locations through Curtin and Tyndall and the East Coast and Queensland there. And lots of interesting things arriving from time to time. Not to mention the 8 o'clock wake-up call as those F-35s afterburners light up and get going. All right, I'm usually awake by then, but sometimes I like to have a sleep in, so living near an airport's not always good, is it? No, just kidding. Love it. So today I thought we could talk about something simple. I haven't talked about some basic concepts for a little while now, and I was thinking, what am I going to discuss and talk about here? And I was listening to the ATIS the other day and a couple little things popped up. I unfortunately didn't get a recording of that, but it just prompted me to think, every now and then there's little bits of info that come out that can cause a bit of confusion, and especially if you're expecting a certain amount of information in a certain format and then something comes that's just a little bit different, it can be enough to sort of throw you and make you question what's going on and what it all means. So what we're going to do today is go around the country and we're going to have a listen to a couple of locations. Unfortunately, when I've recorded this, there wasn't a whole lot of exciting stuff going on, but you'll get the idea. So we've got some VFR style conditions, some instrument style conditions, and also looking at the difference between the information presented on an ATIS and an AWIS. And potentially, that's the first thing we need to work out is what the hell does ATIS and AWIS mean? So an ATIS is an Automatic Terminal Information Service, and AWIS stands for Aerodrome Weather Information Service. Funnily enough, both are for an aerodrome and both are automatic, but I guess they had to separate things out a little bit. So let's have a look at what an ATIS is first, and then we'll be able to break it down and analyze it. Now, the ATIS can come in two different formats, either read out by one of the controllers in the tower, or the information is fed into a automated voice or text-to-voice system, probably one of the first AI-style systems. It's a digitized voice, so that's why sometimes it can sound a little bit funny. And the AWIS is a text-to-voice generated broadcast that just loops over and over. Again, a automated digitized voice. And you can get funny pronunciation and things, as you'll hear coming up very, very shortly. So let's start with an ATIS, and we'll pick one from Darwin first, because why not? That's just where we are. It doesn't matter which one we listen to, really. I've got a couple from around Australia, but let's have a listen to it, and then we'll break it down bit by bit. And if you are listening in a place that you can sit down and not driving a car or something, grab a pen and paper, pause, and then try and scribe it down as it comes in real time.
Darwin terminal information, Golf, expect visual approach, runways 11 and 18 for arrivals, runway 11 for departures, wind 120 degrees 12 knots. Cav OK, temperature 28, QNH 1015, departure frequency 123.0. On first contact with Darwin, notify receipt of Golf.
Okay, how'd you go? Fair bit of information there, but the beauty of it is all the information is coming in a standard format and a standard order. And once you recognize this, it makes things a lot easier. And this is the beauty of not just the ATIS, but standardized radio calls. When we start moving into clearances and other ATC interactions, it can be really mind-boggling sometimes. But the information is always coming in a set order, and there's only really certain things we need to listen for in particular, but otherwise the rest should be as we expect. So let's have a look. So first of all, Darwin Terminal Information Golf. So Golf is simply a code from the alphabet to let us know what letter they're up to and to identify the information that we've got. So when we call either ground or delivery approach, depending on whether we're going out of the airport or coming back in, we're going to receive information Golf. Now, once that changes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So hotel will be the next information. And only one thing in that group of data that we're about to get has to change for that to become a new code. And it's usually the wind or the QNH, the temperature, something like that, or it could be a runway change. All right, the next part was
Expect visual approach.
what that's telling us is how the controllers are going to handle us. If we're a visual pilot, a VFR pilot, we can expect just to come into the airport as we normally would and be positioned somewhere in the circuit for a visual approach and landing. And that doesn't change anything you would do any other day. If we're an instrument-rated pilot, however, this is giving us an idea of expecting a visual approach to come in and land rather than doing an instrument approach. Now, when we come in for a visual approach, sometimes, we might have limitations in our avionics or ability to position ourselves for a visual approach. We may not be familiar with the airport. And so that would prompt you to potentially ask for an instrument approach if that's what you wanted to do, just to make your life easier, or maybe you're doing training or you want to practice one. So this is something that comes up often when we're doing IPCs up here, that if it says expect visual approach, and if you just call inbound like normal, they start vectoring you for a visual and they go, oh, sorry, I wanted to do the VOR or the instrument approach. You need to let them know that. Okay, so little tip for when you're doing training and you have a specific requirement. If you want it for currency, you'll have to ask for it as well.
Runways 11 and 18 for arrivals. Runway 11 for departures.
Okay, so this is now telling us what are the active runway or runways and if there's going to be a difference between how we either get out of the airport or how we get back in. So you heard there runway 11 and 18 for arrivals, runway 11 for departures. So if you're going into the runway and arriving at the airport, this will give you an idea of how you're going to be handled depending on where you're coming from. If you're coming from the north of Darwin, in this instance, runway 18 is a likely option if you can handle any crosswind elements, which we'll find out what that is in a minute. Otherwise, runway 11. And that would tell you that if the crosswind was going to be an issue for you on 18, as part of your inbound call, you would request runway 11 to allow for them to plan your arrival. Again, there's all these little extra hidden bits of information here that it's not just telling you what runways are in use, but it's helping you plan how you're going to be handled by the controllers most likely if you don't say anything else. If you don't care and it doesn't make any difference to you, then you just call inbound and then they'll put you wherever they need to do. All right, if you're coming from the south of Darwin direction, then they'll bring you in on runway 11. So they're not going to take you all the way up and around back in on 18. That just doesn't make any sense. So it helps us plan that. If we're departing, it's just runway 11. That's potentially because runway 18, the crosswind's no good or they've just got other limitations there. So generally speaking, don't ask for something that's not on the ATIS because they'll just tell you that it's not available. If it was available, it would be on the ATIS.
Wind 120 degrees 12 knots.
Pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised how confused people get with what the wind is doing. 120 degrees, 12 knots. So remember, the wind is not the direction it's blowing, but where it's blowing from. All right, 120 degrees is east-southeast. We're on runway 11. So runway directions are which way we're pointing. Wind is where the wind is coming from. So it's only just slightly off from the center line. So runway 11 is pretty much straight into wind. Really nice. 12 knots, nothing too crazy. But again, the 12 knots, if it's blowing across runway 18, that's a 60 degree variance. That might, be getting up towards 9-10 knots there. That might be causing a little issue for you. So again, it'll give you an idea of what the wind is doing at the time.
Cav OK, temperature 28, QNH 1015.
Okay, so Cav OK. What does Cav OK mean? It doesn't mean there's no cloud. What people think it means is cloud and visibility is okay. It actually is ceiling and visibility okay. It can still be overcast for Cav OK, but not below 5,000 feet. Right, and a visibility in excess of 10 kilometres. Be ample for anybody to manoeuvre and get into the airport just fine. Then we have the temperature. Again, just telling you how warm it is. That's for your performance charts and things if there's any limitations there. And also just to know to open the windows when you get on the runway. And, of course, the QNH. The QNH is the aerodrome QNH to put in our altimeter. So we know our millibars, and that will tell us the pressure, altitude, or our height above the runway, of course.
Departure frequency 123.0. On first contact with Darwin, notify receipt of Golf.
Okay, so the final part there is a departure frequency. Now, Darwin has a standard frequency of 123.0 that you contact every time you depart the aerodrome. And they've put that in the ATIS because that's a requirement. And then obviously repeating the information Golf notification again to remind us what the letter was, because we might have forgotten when we did this. So when we're listening to all this stuff, we always want to be writing this down. Now, those of you that wrote this down, did you try and write it all out in plain English? All right. If you're new to this, you probably do. But remember, we don't need to do that because we need to learn to speak aviation. And this is what ELP Level 6 or Aviation English is all about. Whilst everything we just heard was in English, it's aviation English. It's a specific language, if you like, and the terminology can be a little bit confusing. All right, so all we need to write again, because we know the information, we can just write a G for golf. We can just write VA for visual approach, 11/18 or 11, depending on are we coming into the airport or departing. We don't need both. We can just write 120/12. We don't need to say that that's the wind because that's the format the wind comes in. We can just put Cav for Cav OK, 29 for temperature, 1015 for QNH, 1230. So we can all write it in shorthand. And this is the same for when we get clearances and things. And we can talk about that in another episode. All right. So hopefully that helped you a little bit with an ATIS format. Let's have a look at another ATIS from Jandakot with just a little bit of information in it. So I'm just going to play this one right the way through, and then I'll discuss the couple of differences. And in particular, have a listen to the reference to the runway.
Jandakot, through information echo. Runway 24 left for circuits and departures of Armadale Shops, frequency 119.4. Runway 24 right for arrivals and all other departures, frequency 118.1. Runway surface condition code 5554, runway is wet. Wind varying between 150 and 230 degrees, 6 knots. Cav OK. Temperature 13. QNH 1021. On first contact with Jandakot ground or tower, notify receipt of echo.
All right, so a little bit of extra stuff in there, wasn't there? In particular, there are 2 runway uses or possibilities for your departure or your arrival and 2 different frequencies. So part of the process there is we don't necessarily need to write everything down there. We just need to understand how are we departing Jandakot? Are we departing to the south via Yangebup Lake Thompson direction, or are we going via the Armadale Shops? That's all part of your pre-flight planning, all right? If you're just arriving, then you're going to be overflying the field and landing on the main duty runways 24 right. That will make your life a lot easier, again, when you're copying down the ATIS information rather than trying to remember it. The next part there was the runway condition. Now, the runway condition code is sort of something relatively recent that's been added to ATISs around the traps. And you heard that they said 5 by 5 by 5. Now, that's not a radio reading. I've got you 5 by 5. But more the runway condition broken up into thirds. So in this case, 5 by 5 by 5 indicates that the runway is wet along the entire length of the runway, the first third, the middle third, and the last third. It might be that the rain has only fallen on the first part of the runway or the middle or the end part, in which case the numbers will vary. So the runway condition code, or runway CC, is a 5 in each case, which corresponds to a wet runway, and that's usually indicating that any part of that surface is covered by visible dampness or water up to 3 millimeters deep. Now, why do we need to know that? Well, this is going to have an indication of maybe affecting your braking condition. Now, 5 indicates that whilst there is wet water or a little bit of standing water on the runway, it's really very light, and you should be able to indicate normal or get normal indicating. Hang on, I'm going to say this the right way around. You should be able to get normal braking and deceleration conditions and normal directional control, i.e. you're not going to be splashing through big puddles of water, which could cause drag and pull on the gear and make you aquaplane or sort of dart around the runway. So the coding starts at 6, which is effectively a dry runway. 5 is very light. It could be also light snow or slush. Of course, we don't typically have that in most parts of Australia, but some parts do, where we're moving then into 4, where we're starting to get a bit more water or snow slush up to level 1, which is effectively ice and slush, lots of snow. Antarctica, I guess. All right, so we only get a runway report if it's 5 or less. Obviously, if it's dry, we don't need to be told that because that's what we're normally expecting. Right, how are we going? Is that helping a bit? Now, let's have a listen to an AWIS. Now, what is an AWIS? It is, as I said, an Aerodrome Weather Information Service. It is a text-to-voice automated service that repeats every minute. It refreshes. So when I listen to an AWIS, I will typically listen to it twice because it will average the conditions over the last little period of time. But sometimes you listen to one version and then the next one is slightly different, in particular about the wind, especially if it's a little bit variable, 50-50 as to which way the wind's blowing. For this one, we're going to go to Cairns and we're going to have a listen to the Cairns AWIS. I'm just going to play it right the way through because we're starting to get the idea of the format. But we're then going to have a listen to the Cairns ATIS taken from the same time, and we're just going to note a few little differences to be aware of in the details. All right, here we go.
Automated Weather Information Service, Cairns Airport, time 0133 Zulu, wind 140 degrees magnetic at 19 knots, visibility 25 kilometers, present weather, no significant weather, cloud overcast 5,400 feet, temperature 25, dew point 17, QNH 1016 hectopascals, rainfall last 10 minutes nil, Automated Weather Information Service.
And around it goes. So 14019 knots was the wind, and then there was no SIG. What does no SIG mean? No SIG means there's no significant weather in the aerodrome area. It doesn't mean there's no weather on the day or not something out offshore or inland or north or south or whatever. It's always affecting the weather at the aerodrome. All right? Remember, this is an aerodrome report, an aerodrome forecast. And the TAF is exactly the same. I often get people that don't bother reading GAFs and they just look at the AWIS or the ATIS and go, yep, weather's all great. When looking outside, there's clearly not. And it might not be affecting the airport at the time, but there's weather just abroad. So always bear that in mind, that this is a limited radius weather report. All right, now, the cloud that was reported there was overcast, 5,400 feet. So remember, the cloud's broken up into eighths, sky clear being 0, few 1 to 2 eighths, scattered 3 to 4 eighths or less than half the sky, Broken is 5 to 7, and then, of course, overcast is 8. So you shouldn't be able to see any blue at all. All right, now we're going to play the ATIS. Note that the AWIS didn't give runway information. It was purely wind. So you're going to have to use the wind information to work out what runways you use. But let's have a listen to the ATIS now from the same time and just have a listen to the cloud and the differences.
0 kilometers. Cloud. View, 2,500 feet. Scattered, 3,500 feet. Temperature, 6.
All right, so there's a few extra cloud layers in there, wasn't there? So the point is that all this is information. It's relatively accurate, but if you're going in based on the AWIS and expecting there to be no cloud, remember the AWIS is effectively a laser shooting straight up and bouncing off the cloud that's overhead the weather station at the time. Now, if the cloud in the area isn't doing that, then it's not necessarily going to indicate properly. Whereas the ATIS is a part of a observation from the controllers using information that they've got. I know talking to the guys at Jandakot many years ago, they've got various points around the airport that they know if they can see that, then that's an indication of the current visibility. But the visibility is not necessarily in every direction, is it? And the cloud's very much the same. So we just need to use that information carefully and not just assume that that's it. There's nothing below, because that could obviously give you issues on your arrival, especially somewhere around Cairns where you've got really high terrain right next to the airport there. It might change how you have to maneuver yourself and get in. And of course, like I said, it doesn't mean that there's no other weather in the vicinity of the airport. It's just what's in the local area. All right. So use all that information carefully and wisely. Now, just for a bit of cheek, I left the phone call sound in the recordings there just to let you know that you can actually practice listening to the ATIS and the AWIS. And it doesn't matter where you want to be or where you want to go. Most Class D, Class C airports will have a phone number for the ATIS. Now, not all do. I had to listen to Moorabbin AWIS, but I couldn't find a number for the ATIS. Maybe there is, if anyone knows. But most airports have it. So you can look up in the URSA and you'll have the general information listed for that particular airport in the URSA information. If you go to the Met information, there'll be a phone number for an AWIS if there is one. On instrument approach plates, often there's also a AWIS phone number and or frequency. So the AWIS you can access in the air via a frequency. Note that sometimes it's kind of like a lighting system or the PAL, pilot activated lighting. You need to press once or do a couple of clicks to activate the AWIS. If it's all silent and nothing's happening, that could be why. Either that or it's broken. All right. Or you can listen to the ATIS, and if you go down where the frequencies for the airport are listed, you might see like a number 1 or 2 or 3 or something next to it. And in the notes below the frequencies, it will say phone number, usually available 24 hours, depending on when the tower is open, that you can listen to the ATIS. Now, that's a good thing for 2 reasons. A, if you're a student and you're practicing, you can dial that up and you can practice writing it down and listening to it and trying to figure out what it's actually saying. And if you don't understand something, you can ask your instructor or another pilot. If you're traveling around and you want to get an idea of what's going on, it gives you a chance to call it. You might be well outside of radio coverage, but if you've got phone coverage, you could call ahead and just get a bit of an idea of what's happening to, again, help shape your decision-making and planning. Okay, so there's the ATIS and the AWIS. I hope there's some good info in there, and that's sort of helped you understand things a bit. If you're a bit more of a seasoned pilot, like I said, there might be a few little nuggets in there just to help you revise or understand things as well. Again, whenever we have information that we don't understand, remember to go seek it out. Bureau of Met has a lot of great information on their learning centre. Everything else is either in the AIP or Part 91 in the regs. So if you can't figure that out, ask your instructor. If you're still struggling, flick me a message and I'll be more than happy to help you out. All right, everybody, have a fantastic day. Have a fantastic week. Be safe. I'm on a week's leave, so I'm going to be working on my car and the house and probably not getting any rest at all, but I'll be having a bit of a break from flying for the week. But I will see you all very, very soon. I'll most likely be here next week, and I will see you Monday. All right. Until then, blue skies, and remember the golden rule: aviate, navigate, communicate. Cheers, everyone.